And welcome back to episode 100 of the Solar Powered Podcast. I really can't believe I'm here. It's awesome to be here. And I think we've got a really special episode for you guys here today. We're going to be talking about what it means to find your story, to uncover your voice, and to be able to tell your story. Because to be able to, I think, uncover a lot of like the depths and the heart and the essence of our story. There's a lot of stuff that we have to uncover. There's a lot of support that we really need to get. And I've got two good friends of mine who really know all about that. So I think we've got a nice conversation ahead of us here today. So I'll let them introduce themselves, but I'm joined by my dear friend Elizabeth Hill of Green Heart Living and my dear friend Marianne Pack of Envision Greatness, if I can speak English here today. And ladies, if y'all just want to introduce yourself and say hi to the audience.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm Elizabeth Hill. I am the CEO and publisher of Green Heart Living and Green Heart Living Press. And so we help people share their stories. And our mission is really to make the world a more loving and peaceful place, one story at a time. So we help people to write their stories, publish their stories, and get them out into the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Liz is a previous guest on this program from several years ago, but we met through a little project back during the pandemic called The Great Pause. And we've been doing some really awesome work together over the past year or so, and really over the past 3 years. So thanks for joining us, Liz.
Good to be here.
And Marianne, if you want to introduce yourself and say who you are and why you're here.
Thank you. I'm Marianne Pack, and congratulations, Ryan, on your 100th episode. I so enjoyed when you came on my podcast and we talked about unmuted voices. So I am the founder of Envision Greatness Press, and I'm an author and a publisher. And my mission, very similar to Liz's, is to spread more love and joy around the world. And helping people to be able to share those stories, share the transformation, share the healing, and create that love and joy that I want to become. I want to be it so that the energy goes forward into the world, and my authors can also do the same. So that's who I am, and I think that's it.
All right, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. And yes, no, it was awesome to be on your podcast, and I figured it was time to return the favor. All right, so I guess let's just kind of lead off here. Is that I think the first question that I have is just why is telling our story so important? Why are our stories so important? And my thought on this is that our stories are really who we are. We make up our story. We have stories about who we are, who we're not in the world, and our stories change the world. Our voices change the world, and to be able to change the world through our stories, through our voices, and just who we are. Is a really powerful thing. And I think that's why we're all here.
I have to agree that storytelling creates community. I mean, if you think about our ancestors sitting around the campfire telling the stories, and the young ones listening to the elders and learning about life and learning the lessons and the healing. So yes, stories are just so tremendous, powerful communication to create community.
Absolutely. Even back in the caveman days, or even like in the ancient Egyptian days, the hieroglyphics, that's all about people's stories from many thousands of years ago.
I would say also, and I work primarily with helping people share their personal stories of growth, their memoirs, their things that they've been through, with the purpose of helping other people that might be going through a similar thing. So what I often say is that when we do share our stories, that we no longer carry them by ourselves, that the world actually carries them with us. And so often we carry memories, we carry things that we're just like slugging along in our lives, and we're the only ones that have been through this. We think we have to hide it from people, like people won't be able to handle it, or they won't like us anymore if they hear this thing. And my experience of when we do share these, there's actually people that have been through maybe not the same thing, but a similar thing, or even if they haven't been through anything like that, they're sending compassion, they're understanding, them wanting to be there for you, and just sending compassion. It can shift the way that you live life. It can shift your day-to-day just experience, because you don't have to feel like you're hiding a part of yourselves, or you got to keep it locked up. It can be a very freeing experience for the person telling them the story.
Yes.
And then on the other hand, when people are receiving the story, hearing the story, this is what helped me through pretty much every hard thing I've ever been through in my life, is finding a book, reading a story that could help me through that time, getting that. Even we know that difference that it's like throwing a lifeline to somebody. Like, you can get through this, somebody else has. You don't have to do this by yourself. So it's like we're helping people through that as we're helping ourselves at the same time.
Oh yeah. And if you think about it, it makes the world a smaller place, because we're, what are we up to? 8 billion people worldwide, or something insane like that. And those are 8 billion stories, and this is a big planet. But it makes the world makes the world a smaller place, because it kind of shrinks that window of just, we're seeing that we have that story. People can unburden themselves with their traumatic stories, with their with the scary things that have happened in their lives. And to be able to share that with the world, it kind of makes it a smaller place, because people can see themselves in some of these just like deeply traumatic and deeply scary stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. Like today, I was meeting with one of my authors, Aren Nazario, who's written the book Rage to Peace, and we're putting this book out there. And the story is about, he is a gang member. Okay, he's been in and out of prison a lot of his life, and a lot of people would think this person could never change, right? You'd think that somebody could, change is impossible. Somebody's like that, they'd write somebody off, right? And his story is talking about why he became who he was as an adult, like why violence was the normal way of doing life. Like that was what he thought he needed to do. And it actually makes logical sense when you hear and read his story up to that point. And then to see that he's this he's a peace advocate leading a peace organization in Hartford that also impacts national things, to show how change does happen and help us to understand one another. Because if we haven't lived, if we haven't lived through these traumatic events, or lived through a different worldview of things, we have no idea where people are coming from. We take things for granted. We don't see, right? We just don't know. And if we can help open up that understanding through sharing stories and learning from one another, we can help bring change about on a larger scale, as well as an individual level as well. So there's so much power in us being willing to put it out there and talk about where we came from.
Yeah, it's like Brene Brown said, like shame, and there's a lot of shame in that kind of, in that kind of lifestyle, but shame, all it really needs is silence to grow. I mean, I know I butchered that quote completely, but y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm sure y'all heard that. I'm sure y'all heard that saying, is that when you keep those traumas and that, like, that traumatic background, those traumas silent, it just grows and festers and multiplies until it's totally out of control. But when you're able to, and it takes a lot of work to be able to uncover all of that trauma, uncover all of that rubble, as I like to call it, to be able to get to the heart of your story. But when you're able to get to the heart of your story, it opens up so much in your world and with your community and with the people who know you and trust you and like you.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely think, it quells that fear of the unknown. We don't know what it's like to live that life. This young man had a violent life. So you would be fearful of getting to know this person. So, just that when we share our stories, that they do help us have a better understanding of something that we're not familiar with, or so it makes us more fearful and pull back, and I don't want to understand you because you scare me.
Yeah.
But then when you get to the heart of it and they tell their story, and like you talked about, why violence was the norm for him, what we may see it in a lesser version in our own lives. It may not have come out in that direction, but we can still see the attitude that he was raised with, or something like that. So it definitely breaks the barrier of fear of the unknown, of who that person is or what kind of life could they live.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to him several times and, hope to be working with him on a future collaborative project. But you would have never guessed he had this kind of background. By when when you're speaking to him, he's just this gentle, chill, kind of laid back, kind of like fireplace in a ski chalet kind of guy. But that wasn't his background. That wasn't his past. There's a that oh there's a he's a WWE Hall of Famer named Jake the Snake Roberts, who has got an incredible story. It's kind of an NSFW story, but lots of drugs, lots of addiction, and a lot of the kind of the trappings that came with fame and fortune in the 80s in the World Wrestling Federation. But he's since gotten clean and has seemingly gotten past his addictions, although you're never really past your addictions. He's no longer in active addiction. But he said it's such a valuable thing. One of his famous quotes says, "My history is not my destiny." And I think with the authors that we work with the people who we help find the heart of their stories, it really proves that their histories, our histories, are not our destiny. And I think that's the most valuable piece for me in helping some of the authors that I've worked with be able to share their stories.
True. I think it's important too that why we're sharing the story, not to just talk about these bad things that happen, right? Right. It's not to rehash and focus on bad stuff, and like that's not the purpose of it.
Yeah, because if you think about that, it's almost like trauma porn.
Right, exactly. We're not trying to do trauma porn. We're not trying to, I love my, Law and Order episodes. I love that sort of stuff. Like I do, but we don't need, it's not about that. It is about really putting out our stories with the intention of, okay, and what is the lesson behind this? What is the vision behind this? What are we hoping to shift with this? Like, right? Because stories don't need to be that, right? Stories can just be for the purpose of stories and entertainment and like shock value, right? Like it could be that. But what all three of us do is really looking at, okay, when we're looking at sharing stories, what are we hoping to convey or heal through or grow, or what's the beauty and the transformation that's possible in this, rather than just let me, and with that, it's okay to just dump out and vent your first version of your book, right? Like your first version of the story is like, get that shit out of you, right? In that first
get
version.
the crap out for the golden flow. Absolutely.
Oh, so
yeah. Speaking of that, what experiences have we had? And we're all authors here. We're all authors. We're all publishers. But what experiences can we share about just, as you said, just dumping everything out and finding those nuggets? Because I found that as I've gotten more and more experience in my own author journey, I have found that is the most valuable piece for me, is just that, the first drafts are never going to be readable because you haven't really found that story. But there's always going to be, and admittedly, I primarily deal in fiction, although my most recent book was a memoir. But even in those kind of like that those dumpy draft phase, there's still going to be gold that you can expand on, that you can enrich, and to be able to really grow into something really special.
Yeah, I mean, for me, sometimes I just write and I figure stuff out as I'm writing, right? Like I might actually not have a clue where I'm going with the writing. Or I might think it's going one way and it ends up going another. And sometimes you write and you get one phrase out of having written a notebook, 5 pages, you get one phrase, you get one sentence, you get the title of your book, right? So it doesn't need to feel like, and you need to reframe that, like it's not a waste of time, it's not a waste of paper. You need to get that written and out of you so that you can get, and it might be one phrase or one sentence or one chapter title or whatever, but that could make a really big impact for the rest of the book. So you got to release this idea that it's wasted time, or I didn't get as much done as I wanted, or whatever. Like it's all moving you forward, and then at some point it's going to flow right out of you, and you'll get your story in a it's worth the effort.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Ironically, I think that's how I came up with Hello Again, the title of my last novel. Was just in one of those kind of free flow draft phases of just an aside by my main character. And I think it's a really solid title. So, just little nuggets, little gold like that, you can find really anywhere. And Marianne, I wanted to turn to you because you recently did a book where it was it was transcripts of conversations that you had with people on your podcast, where it was more of that verbal, like auditory storytelling, like more of that verbal auditory storytelling tradition. If you want to maybe fill people in on what that process was all about.
Yeah, I'd love to. I do want to touch on, you're talking about kind of that pretty shitty first draft that we all have.
Oh yeah.
It's even the giving yourself the opportunity to dump it in a way that you wouldn't put that tone in your book, but it might be a cleansing for you to release that energy, because it may be very harsh, because you needed to dump that last little bit before you take your breath, come back to center, and then, tone it down, or put the healing back into it, put where you came out on the other side. So that was one thing. As far as the Unmuted Voices series that I did last year, it was a podcast, and then it ended up into being an anthology. So I invited authors, and you were one of them, and Liz was one of them, to come on and talk about being muted, having found themselves muted maybe for years, and then how they moved through healing, transformed, and then now they are living an unmuted life. So that podcast, it was all, asking these authors questions about how they made that transformation and how the initial muting affected their lives. For me, it was very much a health issues all the way. For others, it was anorexia. For somebody else, it was, dealing with being outed as a 12-year-old. And it just turned into a shitstorm between the families. And somebody else, it was an issue with their father. So the book ended up being, I wanted people to feel the conversations. So it actually was, I transcribed those podcasts, and then that's the foundation of our book. So each chapter is that conversation, of course, edited and formatted and made more clear, because as we talk, we don't complete sentences or a thought, or we get sidetracked. Oh, a squirrel, so we cleaned all that up, but it's very conversational. You feel like, as you read the book, you feel like you're in the conversation. And that's what I wanted for the readers, to feel it, to feel that they were part of the journey and the transformation, so that they do it,
Yeah. It just takes you right back to the tradition of sitting by the campfire and telling your story, or sitting over a cup of coffee or a cocktail or a glass of wine with somebody and just talking about life. And that, I think, and it's a really powerful book, and there will be a link in the description on how to get that. But and I was honored to be a part of it, although I didn't. There's not a chapter in it for me, but I was honored to be a part of that conversation. But I think it helps. I think that helped people really experience people in a different way, because these are a lot of the authors in that book were part of our community. But it helps them to be able to see these, to be able to see these people on a different level and in a different way, I believe.
I agree. And again, so many of my guests on the podcast are, because we had more podcasts than I had authors. So, all of their stories, somewhere along the line, there was a nuanced difference that they discovered as they told their story. Or they got on the podcast and were shocked that they told the story they told, because they had intended to talk about a different story. But when the inspiration comes and you allow the energy to flow, that's when the perfect story comes out that needs to be told at that time. Yeah.
That was 100% my experience, Marianne, because I went on thinking, okay, because I've been thinking about this. I'm like, I wonder what, I'll be talking about with Marianne and Unmuted Voices. And I thought I'd be focused on talking about how I was able to get more comfortable with my voice during the pandemic, because I was able to use Zoom, and instead of doing it in person and being on stages, I thought that's what I was going to come into the conversation with you on, and I ended up talking about being in a religion that like wouldn't allow me to speak anything. Like, you cannot say anything that is even slightly against what the doctrine of the religion I was raised in was. And I had no idea that's what I was going to be talking with you about, and it ended up like, whoa, really surprising me in that space. And it felt like it was time to have that conversation. It was time to like share it and get it like out of my physical body, instead of just being something that's like locked down in there. So that's the other power of when you're inviting people to share their stories, and like being willing, because there was something about you that made it safe for me to tell that to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and not for nothing, but what you said about the religion that you were brought up in. When I interviewed you on my podcast, several years ago, one of the things that I thought was really remarkable was like you just dropped that nugget in there, and I'm like, we had maybe had like 2 or 3 conversations by that point.
right.
So there's definitely a power in being able to be with somebody on a different level when you're having that conversation with them, instead of simply just hiding behind their clothes, hiding behind the fancy words that they use in their books.
Right, because it seems like there must have been something that both, because I remember being surprised when you asked, I don't even know what questions it would have been that like invited me to talk about, because that wasn't the topic. It's just, so I guess something about podcasts makes it so kind of get that out, because I wasn't putting it on paper before then, really. I wasn't talking about that in that form very much. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember. I'd have to go back and listen to that episode, because I honestly don't remember the context of that at all. Speaking of that auditory storytelling tradition, Liz and I have been partnering on something that I think is really, really interesting and really cool. Is that we're working with both of our authors to help create audiobooks. And I remember this was maybe February. You challenged me to read, record, and upload my latest book as an audiobook. And we won't get into the technical problems that I had doing this, but it was definitely a different experience for me, going back and reading some of the stories, some of the incredibly painful stories that I shared in that book, and remembering kind of getting back to the place that I had to go to be able to write some of these really painful stories. But it's kind of, this is kind of an unfair question, because we know each other pretty well. But what was your experience of actually listening to my audiobook and knowing, also reading the book, but also knowing a lot of the stories that I shared in that book? How different was it being able to be with me in that way instead of simply reading the book?
Oh my goodness, it makes it so much more real. Mm-hmm. So, right? I mean, so I'm hearing, and even more heartbreaking, I don't know. So I'm listening to you sharing your story in your voice. It just hit me in the heart, and not just like experiencing with you and having it unfold, learning more about you and what you've been through and your experiences, but also knowing that you then could talk about it in this platform, right? So it's like the growth that someone has to go through to have put it all on a paper, first of all, publish the book, and then have the courage to say the whole thing out loud, reliving the whole everything.
Yes.
Is so, it's so, I don't know, it's such a powerful thing to experience as a listener, you know, as a reader, as someone taking in the story. And I'm, you know, imagining so much growth available. And we've talked about this separately just from doing that yourself. But it lands very, it's a very different experience listening to it than reading it on paper for me.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, it was probably kind of an unfair question because most of the time we're listening to audiobooks from authors we don't know or not in relationship with. So, but still, it's, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it helped you to be able to see my story and me on a different level.
Absolutely.
And knowing some of, you know, and knowing a lot of the healing and a lot of the transformation that I had to go through just to be able to write the thing.
Right. Right. And I think so sometimes this is a whole other avenue of things to talk about, but you know, a lot of our authors are people that are doing professional work to help other people in some way. They're helping others transform, or they're coaches, or they're, you know, they're consultants, therapists, healers, whatever the thing may be. They're helping other people. And if someone can listen to your words and your stories and really feel like that connection, or getting to know you more, right? To feel more comfortable with you. Or I know when I've gone to hire people for whatever reason, I need to know that they've lived life. I need to know they're a real person. I need to know that they have street cred, like whatever it looks like, you know, that they can relate to me in some way and not think I'm just a lunatic or crazy, right? Like I have to feel like we have some.
They have to get to know you first for that.
Right. And so, thanks. And so, right. So, but if I listen to them share their story, if I read their book, I feel like, oh, this person gets it. They will get me. They'll be able to be with what I'm bringing, and it really helped me. So from a professional standpoint, it also helps us connect with people that will resonate with us when we share our stories. There's a whole book on, Teresa Knott gave me this book. What is it? Story Brand, I think it's called, which is about like how you actually use stories to build your business, right? So that's a whole other avenue. But in and of itself, it's attract readers, and therefore possible your audience, people that might want to work with you. And it also helps you get into a space where, you know, as I've shared more about myself, I've gotten more comfortable being a human being on this earth. And that makes it, you know, I'm able to connect with people better. I'm able to feel more confident in and of myself, and, you know, connect with people better. So it's very powerful, the power of story to do many different things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that. I think it just, like the word that was coming up for me as you were sharing that was destigmatize. Like it just destigmatizes so much of the, you know, of the stuff that we might have gone through, all of the, you know, all of the pain, the heartbreak, all of that stuff. It just kind of destigmatizes it and kind of breaks it down, and it makes it makes the lessons that much more real.
Yeah, I haven't done the audio books yet. It's on my list to do. But the last few years, I've recorded my blogs, that contain stories, and so that they're kind of like little micro podcasts. The other thing is being able, for me as a ghostwriter, to hear people tell me their story, because they can't write their own. Giving them that opportunity to share verbally, and speak it, and to, so I know how it affects me, hearing their stories and then getting to write chapters for them or books for them, or whatever I'm assigned to do. So even that's profound for me as the writer, behind them, supporting them, telling their story when they can't.
Yeah. I think that really brings up a great point, because a lot of people who have stories that they want to share, who have things that they want to talk about in a book, the idea of writing a book just scares the hell out of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It intimidates them. It just overwhelms them. And I get it. But what are some of the things that we as publishers, as editors, as ghosts, what are some of the things that we can do to, if somebody thinks they have a book that's kind of bubbling inside of them, what are some of the things that we can say to people to be able to help them kind of see that they do have a book bubbling inside of them, and that writing a book is just as simple as typing words and sentences and paragraphs and pages, that it's not, that it shouldn't be as overwhelming and as intimidating as a lot of people really make it out to be. Don't get me wrong, I'm not minimizing it. I'm just saying that there are ways to kind of see past that.
So I would say, first of all, a lot of what I do is validate people when I get on the call with them and they're sharing a story with me. A lot of people go like, oh, is this worth telling? Is this a story out there? Or, or they might feel uncomfortable. They're afraid to put it out there because it involves other people and they don't know how to handle it or write that, right? So I think it can be very helpful to talk with someone who has written a book themselves, is a writing coach, like someone that can listen to your story and say, okay, yes, you have a valid story idea. This will resonate with people because of this, and maybe help you figure out what direction to take it in. Because usually authors are just so, they've lived their whole life, right? They have so many different ideas. It's very hard to select the avenue. And sometimes when I get on the call, I'm like, oh, here's this would be a very, very impactful avenue to take. And they just need to hear that from me because they can't see it themselves. It's just very overwhelming for them. So my advice would be to talk to somebody else that has written a book, is a coach, or published, just somebody that has some experience, just a little bit more experience than you in this area, and hash out the ideas, right? Can be helpful. It's a good first step.
And it wouldn't be a bad idea to send them this podcast episode either.
Right.
Marianne, you have anything there?
Something that I thought about, yes, it's always shoring them up and assuring them and giving them that safe space to work within, so that they can just relax and let it go. But also it's kind of that, like Liz was saying, point them in this direction. I think helping them organize their thoughts can be huge relief for them. Because like you said, it could get so overwhelming. They have so many different stories, but where do you plug them in? And why am I telling it? What does it relate to so-and-so down here, or my healing process? So I'm a very organized mind. So outlines just kind of flow out of me. So once I get to start knowing
I don't
them,
have that problem.
so, I tend to be able to recognize where the chapters are probably going to go and how it flows. So, just even helping them just organize their thoughts. And, I tell them, get a little notebook, a little something, and write down all these different stories that just come to mind. So that when you get to a certain chapter and you're wanting to tell something, you can probably plug in one of those stories. Not that you have to write the whole story out in your little notebook or on your phone notes or wherever, but just something that'll jog your memory. Because then it also lets them release that. It's that release and relief that they will feel because you're supporting them. Yeah.
Yes. It just helps to, I think it just helps to destigmatize it. I think it just really helps to kind of bring it down to kind of a base level, because one of my favorite memoirs is a book called Can't Hurt Me by a man named David Goggins, who I wrote about it in Mining for My Voice. It was incredibly powerful. But long story short, David Goggins is a former Navy SEAL who, one of the smallest things he did to join the Navy SEALs was to lose 100 pounds in 3 months before he started training. But he's a ultra marathoner, and he's there's like hints of learning disabilities and organized crime in his background. Kind of a traumatic background, but there's bits and pieces, really in both of his books, but there's bits and pieces of different snippets. You don't have to necessarily find a narrative thread for all of them. That was one of the biggest things that kept me from writing Mining for My Voice before I did. But there doesn't necessarily have to be a narrative thread through all of the stuff. You can just tell these stories, and they're more than likely they're going to end up making sense, and it's going to end up being able to be pieced together in a way that makes sense and is impactful for a reader. Yeah. And admittedly, I don't, Mining for My Voice was my first nonfiction book, and I primarily deal with fiction. I'm in process of working on novel number 4. Holy shit, I just said that out loud, but novel number 4. I have a completed manuscript on that. I'm just, about to, I'll be talking more about that on the podcast as I move forward here in the course of the year. But even in fiction, the most impactful novels, the most impactful, pieces of fiction, even short stories, there's a big level of truth and, just like a big level of truth and of transformation in those pieces of fiction. I mean, I know, Liz, I think you've got a novel that you're publishing in the pipeline, but there's levels of truth. There's levels of there's levels of authenticity that really make for a good novel.
I think all novels are written from, there's some reason the person feels compelled to write. Like there's something about, so even though it's not them, there is a kernel of it that it is coming through them and is part of who they are, right? There's no way that the story will come out of somebody if it wasn't like something rooted in themselves, that they were being called to share. So, yeah.
Even going back to the Middle Ages and talking about orcs and rings and, you know, elves, there's definitely a compelling reason why people even write like a fantasy like that. Like, you know, like, why did George Lucas write the, you know, first Star Wars movie? He didn't know it was going to make $1 billion, but it ended up making $1 billion. That was just a story, fictional as it was, that just was compelled to be written. You know, like I've got a friend of mine who is who is in process of writing a 3-part ancient Chinese martial arts epic. Fred Yu, he's a, you know, former podcast guest of mine. That's a very niche market, but it's something that he's incredibly passionate about, and it's something that he's incredibly that's just those are just stories that are just clawing their way out of him. So that's yeah, I'm glad you said that, Liz, because these are just stories that must be told no matter how they look.
I think, you know, what I wrote first was never memoir or you know, I only wrote that in my diary. And you look at, I wrote in my diary when I was in, you know, elementary school a lot. But what I wrote for other people, like I would have things in like the school journal and different things like that, were always very like, you know, hidden things that only I understood what they meant, and like all this, you know, stuff. But it was something that was coming out of me that I had to get out. That story had to be out there, and I couldn't really tell my own truth at that point in my life, but I could put it in a puzzle, in a story, and put that out there.
Yep.
So, and there are people, you know, where that is, they aren't in a place where they can do their memoir. They aren't in a place where they can tell their own personal story, but in a way they are telling their personal story through the fiction that they're writing. And it will speak to
not unlike me. Yeah.
Unlike you.
Right? Yeah, it's like coded messages.
Yeah.
You know, it's like your theater background, Liz. You were talking
about. Yes.
When you're in the theater, you can put on whatever mask.
Yes.
You know, and be whomever, but it's still, you know, that energy coming out from you, from who you are. There's something that has to be told.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely something that has to be told. It's something that I feel like you can't sleep until that story is told. You can't really rest until that story is told, no matter how it looks. You know, there's one of my favorite stories of from Greg Allman's book was also one that I read when I was working on Hello Again. But one of his stories was that he literally got up in the middle of the night and had to write a song. This was like when he was like 19 years old. He got up in the middle of the night. He had the song just hit him like a bolt of lightning. And the only thing that he had was a burnout match, like the soot from that burnout match, and the cover on an ironing board. And it just like came to him like by something supernatural. And that song turned out to be Whipping Post, one of the Allman Brothers' biggest hits. So when that inspiration hits, there's not a thing you can do to stop it. It's just gonna come right from you.
Yeah. Yeah, anytime that hits, it happened to me this morning. I got an idea for another book, and it was just like, boom, there's the title, and I had to hurry up and get to my journal so I could write it down. You're just so driven. It's like something else is driving you, and you have to get it out of you, somehow. Whether
Somehow,
it's,
somewhere.
it's certainly not the finished manuscript. It's just the idea, the inspiration. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, we could certainly go on and talk about this stuff for hours, but I just wanted to ask you guys one final question, and that is, I think, just why do we do it? Why do we tell our stories? Why is it so important to us as authors, as writers, as storytellers in the world?
I'm laughing because probably the real reason I tell stories is both my parents tell stories. They just love telling stories. And so I was raised, me and my brother also were like, it was almost like a competition of who's going to tell the best story and get everyone's attention. So that's probably actually the real reason that I do this. But from a kind of a spiritual, philosophical level, I mean, there's nothing more powerful than helping people share their stories and get them out into the world. There's nothing more impactful than that. I've gotten to see so many people go through massive transformations because of being able to put their ideas and their stories on paper and then speak them out loud. Mm-hmm. And it's just it feels like I was put on the earth to do this. So I don't know another way to do life.
I get that. I get that. And I find about your parents, I find that very relatable, because why I'm a storyteller is that my grandfather told the world's greatest campfire stories.
Right.
World's greatest campfire stories. And it just got me so fascinated with storytelling. Marianne, how about you?
And I think for me it was just the opposite. I wasn't around storytellers. So it's like, why doesn't anybody tell stories? I like a good story. Even now, I tell my husband, do you have a story for me? Because I'm just waiting for the next story. And so for me, it's like I say on the podcast every time, my mess is my message. Our mess is our message. So what I went through of not having stories available to me, and I craved it so much because I wanted that community. I wanted that connection. I wanted that sharing the goosebumps, with the friends or family or whatever, and now getting to do that for others, for authors who also want to share. And most all of any work that I do it's like Liz, it's like a spiritual work, because it's always has some kind of a healing message, because for me, I want all of the work that I produce to always be integrative, always give somebody hope that yes, they can heal through this too. So I think that's why I love stories. I crave what I didn't get as a little girl.
I love that. Yeah. Well, ladies, this has been a whole lot of fun. Thank you so much for doing this with us here today. If I could just get each of you to, say how they can find you on the interwebs, how they can get in touch with you. Liz, how about you first?
Yeah, so you can find me on greenheartliving.com. It's the easiest way to find me.
Marianne?
And mine would be the same. Envisiongreatness.com is just a real easy way to see what I do, what I offer, and how to get a hold of me. Thank you so much, Ryan, too. I appreciate this opportunity to share this afternoon with you. And Liz.
My pleasure. This has been a whole lot of fun, and we need to do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies, and thank you so much for watching.